Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of Viva Broadcasts. In this episode, our trombone faculty, Dr. Kenneth Johnson, is joined by Dr. Michael Hall, Director of Trombone and Euphonium at Old Dominion University, and Literature Reviews Editor for the International Trombone Association Journal. Dr. Hall leads us in a historical discussion on the Sackbut, the Renaissance and Baroque predecessor to the trombone.
I am here with Dr. Mike Hall, the professor of music and trombone at Old Dominion University in Norfolk. He is assistant journal editor of the International Trombone Association. He has performed all over the United States, Mexico, Europe, and China, covering a ton of styles, including Renaissance and Baroque music, which is what we're going to be focusing on a lot today. And we're also talking about some recording projects he has coming up. So I think it'd be great to talk about some of those and then get into our presentation.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I wish that we were face to face, but being as it is, here we are online. I'm in my studio where I practice and record every day in my home. And I do record every day. That's part of my practice routine for the last several years now. And that's led to a couple of recordings. The latest recording that I've just released this week, as a matter of fact, it may be out today. Any day now, it'll be out in digital distribution. You can find it on Spotify or Rhapsody or iTunes or Apple Music. It'll be on all of the distributors. It's called The Perilously Tempered Trombone, and it's a prelude and fugue in every major and minor key for alto, tenor, and bass trombones, four trombones, trombone quartet, and they all come from J.S. Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. Ralph Sauer, the retired principal trombone of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, arranged the fugues, and he asked me to record them. And so I started to do that, and then I realized, I can't release this without the prelude that goes with the fugue. So I arranged the preludes and recorded them as well. It took a couple of years. It's about 2 hours of music, and I had a ball doing it and learned a lot. And the next project I'm involved in is mainly being performed on sackbuts, alto, tenor, and bass sackbut, which is something we're going to talk about today. About 80 composers have composed a piece of music on the text O Sacrum Convivium. So I just looked at the breadth of material there that ranges from about 1400 to the present day and decided, I think I want to investigate all of this music on this text. So I'm beginning to record those pieces. I've got 6 or 7 of them done now. And I'm using them with my students at Old Dominion in the Sackbut Consort, which is a class that we will have going this fall once again. So hope you have opportunity to stumble across those recordings as time goes by and take part in them. I hope you'll find them helpful and enjoyable and whatnot. Yeah, and then there's Kenneth has got Art of Fugue, which came out in 2010.
The OG. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. Nobody has CDs anymore though, so
yeah, this is the last one I think I'll ever have. This will how I'll end my CD collection.
Yeah. Nobody even has a machine to play them on anymore, so
yeah.
An old technology. So the guys have asked me to speak to you today about early brass playing, early brass instruments, and so we're going to investigate that in the next few minutes by actually looking at the instruments that were played themselves, because they're quite different than modern brass instruments. And so I want to share my screen with you, if I can do that right now. And I'll also share audio with you. And I want to go to a website. I've just got to find it here. One minute here. Should have had this done already. I was too busy talking to Kenneth. Okay, here we go.
I'm very easy to talk to. It's one of my many great qualities.
All right. So hopefully you can see the same screen that I'm looking at. This is a very cool resource from Case Western Reserve University. They have a fantastic early music program there for several decades now, actually. Lots of early music specialists have graduated from that program. And here is a list of instruments of antiquity, and they are organized here sort of by era or age. We've got instruments that are commonly found in the medieval period, which is going to be prior to 1400, in the 1200s, 1300s. Then we've got Renaissance instruments, which is roughly 1400 to 1600. And then Baroque instruments, which is roughly 1600 to about 1750. And so I want to start at the beginning, because the one brass instrument in this list of medieval instruments is the trumpet. So we're going to go to that resource and take a look at the medieval trumpet. So the important thing to realize here with the medieval trumpet, or just with the trumpet of antiquity, is that while we have things that have existed like ram's horns, horns of animals, and conch shells and things like that, which were resonant chambers that people buzzed their lips into, this is the predecessor of all brass instruments. They're sometimes referred to as trumpets or some version of a trumpet, but none of those instruments exist in real life. That is, none of them have survived and come down to us. So the medieval trumpet that's made of brass, you can see pictured here, is a long tube with one end of the tube flared out a little bit in sort of a bell-shaped, although you can see it's more funnel-shaped than bell-shaped. And there's going to be some sort of mouthpiece-shaped device to buzz your lips into. We don't have any of these instruments. All we have is pictures of them. This is really the only way we know that they existed. And this discipline of studying things in history through pictures is called iconography. And so the evidence for medieval trumpets comes exclusively from iconography. Here's the first example of them, and here is a later example of the trumpet once instrument makers learned how to fold a tube or bend a tube back on itself without crushing it. The way they did this was to fill the tube with pitch, with pine tar. They would pour hot pine tar into the tube, let it cool, and it would be not completely solid, but it would be semi-solid. Then you could fold the tube around some round molding device, usually a piece of wood, and the tar or the pitch inside the tube would keep it from crushing or crimping. And that enabled then the tube to remain rather continuous throughout, and that was a big innovation. That's the first big innovation in brass instruments. So you can see them becoming shaped into S-shaped instruments, which is a help because this instrument is going to be difficult to play and difficult to maneuver and transport. This instrument is easier. It's easier to do both. And then you can see how this evolved over time. This picture comes from about 1416. And then finally we get to the latest innovation in the trumpet, the medieval trumpet, and that is, it's hard to see in this picture, but this is a picture of a slide trumpet, or what we believe was a slide trumpet. There's no examples of these instruments. All we have is these pictures. So we've got one tube that telescopes into another tube. It's not a trombone yet because we don't have a slide. We just have the entire instrument can be slid back and forth on the mouth tube How many positions? Maybe two or three. Nobody's really sure. This picture comes from about 1480. The slide trumpet. So the cool thing about this resource, this website, is we can hear an example of this instrument being played because modern instrument makers have come along and using this iconography, they've built instruments that they believe, that we believe, are as close as we can come to what might have been true in medieval times, early Renaissance times. So this is an example of the slide trumpet being played alongside two shawms. So you're going to hear three voices. A shawm is a cross between a trumpet and an oboe. It's a wooden instrument with finger holes like an oboe. It's got a double reed like an oboe, but it's got a bell on the end of it that's more like a brass instrument. Makes a loud and piercing sound, and we'll see some examples of that in pictures in a few minutes. So here's just a little taste of the slide trumpet being played with two shawms. Really interesting sounding stuff. Not like modern music at all.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, the cadences are different. Are there any questions or anything? Well, I'm going to certainly have time at the end for some questions, but if anybody's got a burning question, we can.
I had a request for some Dixieland or traditional jazz from you, but I don't know if maybe we'll get to that at the end. I just thought it was really interesting with the sham how it's clearly a reed instrument, but it also has some of the resonant. You can hear in the whole the resonant factors or the qualities that you would give to a brass instrument. You hear it in a different way. It's very, very interesting.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So as the Renaissance period unfolds, instruments are sort of divided into two classes. There's soft bands and there's loud bands. And brass instruments, of course, were part of loud bands that played with shawms and with louder instruments like hurdy-gurdies and things like that.
I'm just curious, how much would the place these instruments are being played go into would a loud band only be outside or in a large space, and a soft band how much were these instruments being played, kind of like how much the cathedral Gabrielli wrote for influenced his music?
Right. Well, this is prior to Gabrielli by a couple hundred years, and this music and these instruments are going to be played in places where there's money.
Okay. Because
the instruments are expensive. So we're talking about the court, we're talking about royalty, and or the church. But these instruments are not really in church yet. That's going to come later. So they're played in court, they're played indoors and outdoors. But of course, the loud band is going to play outdoors. You're almost never going to hear a soft band playing outdoors. It just doesn't work.
Awesome. And so it's at this point, are the musicians still kind of seen as servants in the household, or are they freelancing?
You bet. Getting a job as a musician at this point in time would be you need a patron, and then those groups of musicians developed into guilds. And the guilds were perpetuated by birth. So you're born into a guild. Your father would teach you to play these instruments on the secular side. If you entered into a musical life through the religious side, through the church, then you would start as a young child singing. The first thing you learned to do was sing. And then you would learn instruments after that. It's a sort of a conservatory system there.
I always thought it was interesting when learning about guilds in one of my early music classes. was that different trumpet guilds would hold their own secrets to high notes. And I realized that trumpet players haven't changed at all in 600 years.
That's pretty much true. Yeah, because there are some skills there. Okay, I want to move over to Renaissance instruments before we get too long on time here. And the next one I want to go to is my instrument, the sackbut, which is kind of a funny name for an instrument, but we're really just talking about the trombone. The word sackbut comes from two French words, sacque and botter, which means push and pull. So this has to do with working the slide. An advancement comes somewhere in the middle 1400s. Nobody's really quite sure exactly when the sackbut is invented, but the slide trumpet idea is advanced by making two tubes slide, telescope over one another, instead of just one. And so now we have what is the configuration of the modern trombone and the old trombone. They haven't changed that much. This picture of four trombones, which is, they came in families. They were made alto, tenor, bass, and then this is called court bass, which is, it's actually twice as long as the tenor instrument. So we would call that today the contrabass trombone. This comes from Michael Praetorius, who wrote a treatise about instruments and all sorts of music, and it was published in 1618 and 19, and that's what the family of trombones looked like around that time. The first instrument to be developed was this one, the tenor instrument, and it persisted for 150 years before, well, 100 years before the bass instrument comes along. And then the alto instrument comes not really until the Baroque times. It's the last one to come along. You'll notice that the bass trombones have this funny device on the slide. This is a handle because the slides were too long for your arm to actually move to the lower slide positions. You could only get to fourth or maybe fifth position if you had really long arms. So to get the longer slide positions, you have this handle. Well, that makes the instrument really difficult to play by comparison to the tenor trombone, where we have direct contact with the slide. So that instrument fell out of favor. But I have to say, right up through World War II in England, the bass trombone was pitched in G, and it had a handle like this. So that the instrument lasted a long time. It just wasn't a terribly agile instrument. Here is the shams that you heard earlier, pictured with the slide trumpet here. And I want to give you some more pictures to look at. Here is the tenor sackbut. You see the bell is more funnel shaped, and the bore size of the sackbut is more like, it's about the same size as a modern B-flat trumpet. It's really small. And because the bell is funnel shaped, it doesn't project sound with as much volume as a modern trombone. And so it's a softer instrument. It blends real well with voices and with other woodwind and string instruments. Here's a bass sackbut. You can see the handle here and extra tubing that's added to make it longer. This one from 1612 is likely pitched in F. That's the kind that we have at ODU. We have an E-flat alto, couple of B-flat tenor sackbuts, and then F bass sackbut. Here's the consort, the instrument consort that the trombone was played in more often than not. There's a single trombone here with three shams, 1, 2, 3. This is a cornetto that we're going to look at in just a moment, and this is the dulcian or the curtal, which played the bass voice. This usually played the tenor voice. So here's the sound of the sackbut just being played by itself. Here is the sound of the bass sackbut being played by itself. And here's the sound of sackbut with shawms. I hope that the volume of this is okay.
It's great for me.
Good. So you can hear that's much like the slide trumpet with shawms that we heard earlier, but this music is more modern. The cadences are more advanced than they were in the medieval times. So there's the sackbut. Now I want to take you to the Renaissance cornetto. This instrument is really interesting. It comes from the animal horn, the oliphant, which is made out of ivory. But here is a cornetto. So cornettos came in families as well, and the reason that I'm introducing this to you is because although they're fingered like a woodwind instrument, they've got holes that you cover with your fingers. They've got a brass type mouthpiece that you buzz your lips into. They take a piece of wood and split it in half, and it is curved because it was impossible almost to make one of these instruments at the right pitch out of a straight piece of wood because your fingers just couldn't reach far enough to cover the holes. So they would choose a curved piece of wood, they would split it in half, they would hollow out the interior, then they would put the two halves back together, wrap the whole thing in leather, drill the holes, add the mouthpiece, and then you've got the cornetto. So the higher pitched cornetino is this one, cornetto, and then this is a tenor voiced cornetto, which they called the lizard, and then this is the bass version of the cornetto, which they call the serpent, and it's got finger holes along its bends as well. This is pretty big. This is probably 3 feet from here to here, and you would set this on the floor and blow into the top of it. It would come up to about your mouth roughly if you're sitting in a chair. So here is the sound of the cornetto with a couple of string instruments, and you'll be able to hear the cornetto very clearly. This was a highly prized Renaissance and Baroque instrument because you can play really florid music on the cornetto. The only instrument that matches it really is the violin or stringed instruments. So here's a sampling of cornetto or cornet. This is an incredibly beautiful instrument.
Yeah.
And here's just a tiny sampling of the cornet being played with sackbuts, because cornets played with sackbuts in the loud band, and the dulcian or the curtal is playing the bass voice in this particular example. Yeah, so you'll notice that this instrument or this music from the Renaissance period now is polyphony. So what do we mean by that? Well, each instrument in the group has got its own melody. The melodies move in their own rhythm, but they're constructed in very crafty and creative ways so that harmonies emerge. But no one thought in terms of vertical harmony at this point in time. It was all horizontal melodies. Everyone had their own melody. As a matter of fact, music was not written in scores. There was no such thing as stacking one voice on top of another in a score like we do today. That just didn't exist. The music was created in part books. So you would see your own part, and there were no measures. There was just notes on a staff, and everyone had to stay together by agreeing to what they called a tactus, which is just what we would call today the pulse or the beat. There was no meter. And so if you listen carefully to this music, you're not going to find 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That just doesn't exist. The music each melody has its own meter, and they overlap with one another. No one even thought in terms of meter. But I digress.
I kind of have a question. So at this point, are the instruments less? I don't know if the word functional is, but but prior to this, we saw like trumpets and towers, signal. We see like these instruments as signal instruments. At this point, they're not really as functional. They're just to be used to play music or in ceremonies like that.
Well, the trumpets are outdoor instruments, and they are used almost exclusively in things like signaling, military use, the hunt, that sort of thing. The cornetto and the sackbut, they are indoor instruments, and the sackbut goes into the church immediately and begins to perform with chorus, with choir. And that's where you'll find them for 300 years. They're in the church. The other instruments, brass instruments, couldn't do this because they could not play diatonically through their own range. They had to use only the harmonic series.
Okay.
Which we'll see further here in just a minute. So now we want to move to the Baroque instruments and look at how the trumpet has changed from the Renaissance to the Baroque. Here is a Renaissance trumpet. Now this is a high Renaissance trumpet, and it's probably pitched in D, I would imagine, and it's just a single tube that's folded with a bell. The bell is quite funnel shaped. Now compare that with these Baroque trumpets and see how the bell shape has changed. It's still just a folded tube, but the bell shape now is more like a modern trumpet when we get to the Baroque period. And the sound of this instrument is just rich and fantastic. And I'm not going to spend too much time right here because we've got somebody who's going to demonstrate this instrument in a video to you in just a moment. But here's the sound of this Baroque trumpet now. It's just this single tube using the harmonic series only to play the Telemann Concerto in D. So you can hear for that instrument to be able to play melodically stepwise, it has to play in its high register at the top of the harmonic series where the notes are close together, and you can actually do that. I want a quick move to the Baroque trombone. Now we've got alto, tenor, and bass trombone functioning as a set that plays in a section like a modern orchestral trombone section might. So here's a quick example of trombone being played with cornetto and continuo. It's an organ continuo. So this composer Dario Castello is fantastic. He writes the coolest stuff for trombone. This is a sonata that's actually for two instruments in duet, trombone and cornetto. And organ is usually the continuo instrument, which is sort of the accompanying instrument that would cover the bass line for those guys. Now, by the time we get to the Baroque period, the horn has come into existence. Let's take a quick look at the horn. You notice there is no horn in medieval or Renaissance music. It exists, but it exists as an outdoor instrument. It's used in the hunt more than anything else. And this is what the earliest horns look like. This comes from the early 1700s, made in Brussels. It's just a version of the trumpet, but it's longer. Its bell is a bit bigger. By modern standards, though, the bell is really small, and the bore size of the instrument is also really small. See how they're played? You stick the bell up in the air and play them, like modern horn players are asked to play in a Mahler symphony from time to time. Bells up, And so here's another picture of them being played in a Baroque setting. This is obviously at court, right?
Yeah.
And Bach uses these instruments. Here's another picture of them being played with a continuo instrument. This happens to be a harpsichord. And finally, by the time we get to the classical era and Mozart, we have this skill called hand horn playing. So no hands are near any bells in the Baroque era, but in the classical era, they learned that if they put their hand in the bell, they can control pitch, and, it's mainly pitch. They can actually make the middle register of the instrument make a diatonic scale, whereas before they were relegated to just three notes within that, within the harmonic series in that register. So here is just a taste of Baroque horns being played. Here's three of them playing in trio from First Brandenburg Concerto of Bach. Cool. They're really cool. I love them. They're sort of edgy, and when they're played aggressively, they're really, really exciting. Okay, before I run out of time, I want to let all of you hear a master on each of these instruments describe how they work. So let's go to the Baroque trumpet, and this is the principal trumpet player of
this is
Age of Enlightenment
a Baroque trumpet. It's fairly new off the press. This one was made by a friend and colleague of mine, Robert Van Ryn. So as you can see, it's quite shiny. It's a replica of an instrument made by the Ayer family, who were based in Nuremberg. And I suppose the basic thing you would notice straight away about it is that it looks quite unlike a modern trumpet, in that it's much longer and it doesn't have any vowels whatsoever. By using a combination of vowels, we can produce a whole chromatic scale. However, on this trumpet, all we can do is play one basic harmonic series, which goes like this. So as you can see, those notes were actually quite spaced out in the lower register, and then they got close together in the high register. So this meant that the trumpet traditionally, in its low register, because it can only play a few notes, would play particularly loudly and play lots of fanfare-like, really outdoor music, really. So here's an example. So that's the sort of thing that might be played when some member of the nobility arrived, And trumpet became very much a status symbol. The number of trumpet players you had sort of equals today what kind of car you drive. So trumpet players were the sort of Ferraris of the 17th century, if you like. So, as we can hear there, the trumpet is playing very loudly and very powerfully. That's something that composers like Bach could use very well at the beginning, for instance, of the Magnificat. We hear the trumpet playing its main arpeggio, quite strident in its nature. That sort of beefy sound of the natural trumpet is something that can't really be recreated on a modern trumpet, because a modern trumpet is so much shorter, and the length of a tube that it's being played, it really affects the sound. So moving on to talk about the trumpet in its upper octave, then suddenly trumpet players found that by using those notes that are close together.
So I want to draw your attention to his trumpet right here. These are called tone holes. There's actual hole in the pipe right there that helps him get the intonation in the register that he's about to introduce to you, the upper register of the instrument. This is a modern innovation that's been added to Renaissance and Baroque trumpets. And there's a big controversy in the early instrument world about these. They did not exist in the instruments of the Renaissance and the Baroque. No one had thought to do that, I suppose. And those instruments are just harder to play, like by a big factor than this. So this is a cool tool. I don't blame him for having it, but I wanted you to know what those are and why they're there. Now listen to him play in the upper register.
In a more subtle way, they could become more florid in their pattern of playing. By using different articulations and by playing softer, they could then mimic the human voice and a flute and woodwind instruments. So they developed this way of playing which Baroque composers used to the extreme. And so if we go back to the Magnificat, we can hear, after that opening passage, the trumpet then in its upper octave suddenly starts to play in this very florid-like manner. So now I've got a different trumpet, which is a trumpet that I've had for quite a long time, around about 30 years or so, and this is a trumpet pitched in F. That's quite a unique pitch for a Baroque trumpet, in that Bach only ever wrote one piece in F, and that was the Brandenburg Concerto. There were certain other pieces written by other composers in F, but nothing went to the sort of stratospheric heights that the Brandenburg does. And also the trumpet in that pitch is quite delicate, particularly the high register. It's very difficult to play loudly, and it's used in such a way that it's balancing, or should be balancing, with the other instruments, the other soloists, a violin, a recorder, and an oboe. So the trumpet is very much away from the sort of outdoor, sort of fanfare-like instrument, battlefield instrument. It's pretty much as far away as it can get in the Brandenburg Concerto, and it's now suddenly become a very florid, almost woodwind-like instrument, playing very subtle nuances and very subtle phrases at the top of its register. So I'll give you a little example of that. So the trumpet continued its development.
I'm sorry, I should have made the screen go full view for you a while back before he even started. So we don't run out of time. I want you to hear natural trumpets being played together because they functioned in ensembles. Like he said, the more trumpets you had, the higher your status symbol. Check this out.
Yeah, the modern trumpet sounds really clear, direct. And sometimes it's good if you play jazz. It's amazing. But if you start to play on modern trumpet, Baroque music, which was written for Baroque trumpet, which is 2 times longer, which has much more overtones, which has very soft and very silky sound, it's totally different. And also it makes fun. Sometimes it's like a sport, just because it's a bit much more difficult to play things on this trumpet. But if you could do this, if you're allowed to do this, or if you can manage this, it makes much more fun.
Pretty cool, huh? When I was in college, high school and college, I was knocked out by trumpet ensembles of the Baroque. I just couldn't get enough of them. The New York Trumpet Ensemble, I wore those records out. I really enjoyed them. But I'm running out of time, so I want to take you to the early horn. Check this out. Here's the Baroque horn.
So in Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 1, you'll find the horn players of the OAE probably using their most primitive setup of any of the ones we use in the OAE. This is a new instrument I've had made. It's copied after an Eichentopf from Leipzig in 1738. Lovely copy made by Luke Woodhead. Although the instrument is still quite long, it's actually quite a small bore, and the bell is very small. And one of the upshots of this is that we don't play with a hand in the bell like you would do in 19th century and in modern French horn music. This makes the horn make quite a direct, unfiltered sound. It also has the effect that you can't really correct the pitches very much. And given that the natural series of notes we have available to us is the following. As you can hear, that natural series of notes is very wide widely spaced at the bottom and gets closer and closer together at the top. So the options you have if you're writing music that includes horns is that you can either write sort of very simple tonic fanfares in the middle register, or more intricate, complicated music if you write it high up. And Bach uses both of these in the Brandenburg Concerto. So the shrillness and directness and the sort of high tessitura of the Baroque horn is something that disappeared once players started putting their hands in the bell of the instrument. And
so now I want to get you to check out his hand horn technique and style. This is really interesting.
in the latter part of the 18th century, when Mozart wrote his horn concertos for his lifelong friend Joseph Leutkeb, the horn had changed considerably from how it had been at the beginning of the century. The Baroque horn, from the early part of the century, tended to be made in one loop, in one fixed key. It had a small bell was played with the hand out of the bell, and the notes that were available to the player tended to lie very high up. As the harmonics got closer together, high up, that's where they all were in order to be able to play tunes. And with minimal adjustment, either with the hand or the lip, it was possible to get a reasonable series of notes out. Now, this all began to change around the middle of the 18th century, and horns started to develop. The bells became bigger, and the hand was often put in the bell, but more of that later. They started appearing with tuning slides, so it was easier to adjust the pitch to play with other instruments. And one of the other big changes was that they were made much more often with terminal crooks, that's to say a lead pipe of varying length which could be put on at the beginning of the horn and would make it play in different keys. Now, these changes began to be reflected in the kind of music that composers wrote for the horn. Initially, there was no need to make very many adjustments. The use of the hand in the bell allowed not only subtle tuning differences, but it meant that certain notes which were very intransigent could be brought better into tune by either covering with the hand or taking the hand out of the bell. But most significantly, it was possible by moving the hand around to open up the middle register of the horn, which is something that hadn't been done before. Really, in the middle octave of the horn, there are only 4 available notes on the open pitches, and now by moving the hand around, it's possible to gain a fully chromatic octave. Although this was quite
That's pretty cool. That's some real skill there. Takes quite a while to learn to do that on the natural horn. Okay, because of time, now I want to take you to the Dark Horse Consort so that you can see cornets and trombones being played together as they would have 300, 400 years ago. And what we're about to hear just a bit of is by Giovanni Gabrieli, the Canzone Septimi Toni. This many of you may have played this, and you'll recognize it when you hear it because it's been arranged for modern brass instruments, and it's really popular for not so much brass quintets, because this is an 8-voice piece, 2 choirs of 4 voices each, but this was played in St. Mark's Cathedral, and it was played on these instruments. You're going to see on the top voice, the cantus voice, violin, Baroque violin, and you'll notice that the bow is different, the violin is different. I don't have time to go into that, but cornetto is playing the alto voice, trombone is playing the tenor voice, and in the choir over here to the right, you'll see you see the handle right there. Well, you'll see it better when I blow it up here, but the bass trombone is playing the bass voice in this choir over on the right. So here's the Gabrieli Canzone Septimi Toni. So now I want to draw your attention to the articulation. The Renaissance articulation on a brass instrument is T-I-R-I, where the R is sort of rolled in a European sort of way. Tiri, 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 tiri. So you're going to hear that in action. And I just want you to take note of how very refined the articulation, the pitch, the dynamics, every note has shape to it. So this music is incredibly colorful. Check it out. Yeah, I wish we had more time to listen to all of that because that's just wonderful playing. The last thing I want you to hear is an example of these same instruments playing with voices, which is what they did so often. This is Dexit Dominus of Claudio Monteverdi. This music comes at the very dawn of the Baroque era. See how the voices interact the instruments. Boy, I wish we had more time for that. Such great playing and beautiful music.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Okay, I want to give some time, though, here at the end to hear from you if you have any questions or comments. And so let me unshare the screen here, and we can come back to that.
I'm not seeing any questions, but I always have questions. I'm always confused by something. So one of the things I don't always understood about the Sackbut is that there was a lot more access to vowel shapes than we kind of use on modern trombone. We kind of are regulated to an ah, and listening to this presentation, is that have to do with the kind of requirements of the Sackbut? Like we're typically a section instrument now, and if you're playing a lot of lines and you're playing with a lot of vocalists, it would make sense that you would want to have the same kind of colors a vocalist has access to. So was a Sackbut in different style, typically playing with different vowel shapes as well as different articulations?
Absolutely, yes. Good observation. Because Sackbuts played with voice so often, the model for Sackbut playing is voice, and so all the music that Sackbuts would play is texted. And so if you're playing a piece of music on Sackbut, a Renaissance music in particular, and there's no text with the notes, you're really handicapped. You need to know what the text is, because the consonants that they use, a hard consonant versus a note that may start with a vowel, like eus, eus, E-J-U-S, this Latin word eius. So it starts with no articulation at all. I don't tongue the note at all if it says eius, but I absolutely tongue or release the end of it very dramatically, because the vocalist is going to end the note dramatically with the consonant S, eius. All right, right now I'm working on convivium. You hear how has this natural decrescendo in it, and con starts with a pretty hard percussive. Yeah, it's a different way of playing, a completely different way of playing. It's all vocally, the vocal model is the basis of it.
And so you mentioned that correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of started getting into playing this kind of music in your undergrad?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, as a matter of fact, I was interested in it, but there was no opportunity. I would have killed to have been able to study this music. I studied it about as much as anybody in college who takes a music history class and is introduced to it. But I didn't have a sackbut, and I wasn't with people who knew anything about this music. My teachers were orchestral players and jazz musicians. So I've come to this later, and I'm having a ball learning about it.
So how would you suggest interested students kind of get into it beyond what if they've seen this class and suddenly are inspired by this kind of music?
Well, you notice that everything that I showed you today is on the internet? I mean, type sackbut into Google, and you're going to get more stuff than you can view in a week, sitting. And then seek out early music festivals, early music, and they're all over the place. All of it. There's all sorts of amateur musicians that are interested in early music, and they form ensembles and play together. And so they host festivals. They're all over the country. I've been taking part in the Madison Early Music Festival in Madison, Wisconsin, the Indiana Sackbut Workshop, which happens not far from IU, Indiana University, in the summers. Fantastic experts on the instruments that are willing to come and work with people like us to help us learn about how this music works and how it was played and how the instruments work. Also, there's a bunch of makers now in the U.S. There weren't even 20 years ago. You had to go to Europe to get an instrument. Now there's great makers in the U.S. You can get an instrument. I just bought a sackbut within the last year from Brad Close in Los Angeles. It was $2,200.
Wow.
Handmade, gorgeous instrument.
I had oh wow, that is beautiful.
Yeah, cool tool.
I had thought about would you if someone didn't have access to a sackbut, could they try to get the same kind of sounds out of like a small bore tenor with maybe a muted or like a soft tone mute on it or something like that? Would that be, or just
you can imitate what's going on there, especially the way it's played, with the articulation. T t titty 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 titty, as opposed to do 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 do, which is the way modern brass players tend to play. They tongue everything the same way. Yeah. But you're not going to get the same sound, and I would not use a mute. You're just going to play the open horn, let it ring, and it's just played delicately.
That's what I found, because my exposure to a lot of this music is the Castillo you played. I played a piece by him and a piece by Riccio. Was just I'm in what's typically a new music ensemble of trombone, violin, and piano, just because there's not a lot of repertoire for it. But there was, if you go back, suddenly you look in consorts and Castillo, there's all this music for it. And I found it just a way to play with people I normally wouldn't get to play with by playing this music, because all these combinations exist that just didn't kind of make it into the modern, like the Piero ensemble or the modern brass quintet or the wind quintet. These groups of these kind of now strange instruments existed a long time ago, but they just didn't catch on. And one of them being the underrepresented violin, trombone, and piano trio.
Yeah, those instruments play together, as you just saw and heard. The other thing that I've come into contact with is how very challenging this is. I'm drawn to this now I'm 58 years old now, at kind of the end of my playing life, because this is the most challenging trombone playing I've ever undertaken. I mean, the Bluebells of Scotland is one kind of challenge, and Bruckner, being played, or Tchaikovsky being played with 3 or 4 Fs is one kind of challenge. But this is so challenging to the airstream. Your airstream, you just need very fine control of your airstream and of your face, which needs to be very soft and delicate. So it's a different kind of challenge, but it's really put me to work. I've enjoyed that. I'm looking for that at the end, and I'm kind of tired of playing Arbin and all that stuff. I've done it for years. It's beneficial. It's great. It's helped me learn to play Schlossberg. Yeah, it's great stuff. It really helps us learn to play the modern instrument. This is just a different set of challenges. So I've been working with singers. You want to hear something I recorded just recently with singers?
That sounds great. Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, so check this out. This is by Johannes Cicconia. It comes from the early Renaissance, and it has a medieval flavor to it. It's called O Padua.
I think it might be playing through your ears if it hasn't already started.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it did it. I thought it was just taking a second to start.
Okay, so never mind. It's iTunes is not going to play through my interface, which is so lame. Sorry, guys. Well, anyway, it's medieval flavored sounding two sopranos and sackbut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, it's so a lot of I was remembering you had some Marcello. If people are interested in hearing you play, you have the CD I have, but I saw you recorded some Marcello sonatas, and I was using that a lot when there was a Marcello sonata on an audition, and I used one of your recordings a lot to kind of get a feel for how to actually play it. Are there any what other recordings are out there that you've?
Yeah, I recorded all the Marcello sonatas, all 6 of them, and embellished them in the Italian Baroque style, and also recorded all the Galliard sonatas, the Galliard bassoon sonatas, and embellished them in the Galant style. But both of those sets of sonatas are published by Cherry Classics Music in Vancouver. So the score that comes has got a blank staff above the solo line so that you can notate your embellishments, because this music is all, there's a lot of improvisation that went with this music, and I've just never heard any trombone player anywhere even attempt it. We just avoid it and just play the notes that are there. And so while that can be somewhat satisfying, it's not the way it was done. That's not the style. So on the cello or on the bassoon, they would have embellished the music like crazy. The music as published was just a framework upon which you interject your own creativity, and then you make the piece your version of it, which is something kind of lost in modern solo repertoire. You know, if you play the Erika Wesen sonata, you need to play what he wrote. You don't fool around with it. But that's not true for Marcello and Galliard. They just gave you a framework, and then they expect you to embellish it, and the point of the embellishment is to heighten affect. So you choose an affect for a particular movement in Baroque music and Galant music, which is music that is about to become classical, like Mozart, Haydn style classical. And then you seek embellishments that heighten that affect. And we could go another 2 hours just on that concept alone.
Well, yeah,
but
we spoke about that a lot, and I forgot to mention this beginning, but I'd studied with you. Well, I was supposed to study with you twice before the alto competition, but I had some traffic issues, and so I wasn't able to. But then I was able to the next year, and we talked a lot about different type of the graces, and you had a packet you gave me with all the different embellishments, and it was really, really interesting and helpful, because we really think about is, okay, grace notes, Baroque music is on the beat, modern music before the beat, and that was kind of the extent of my understanding of grace notes and Baroque, and so it was really interesting to hear all the ways that they're actually used.
Yeah, it's all about dissonance and resolving that dissonance. Where you place it, how long it lasts, and when you resolve it and how you resolve it. And, tonal music works that way. It's all about dissonance and resolution, but or much of it is anyway.
I guess since we're now at 2:04, like I said, we could keep talking forever. I kind of had a question. You see a lot of trombonists playing the Bach cello suites as a way of getting into Baroque music, but as we talked about, we have Baroque music we could play. What's an alternative to the cello suites written for our own instruments that you would suggest if someone is trying to play Baroque music?
Yeah, so there is a whole body of music from the high Baroque times that comes from a specific area in what is now the Czech Republic, around Prague, Brno, in that area. And this music it tends to be church music, comes from the church, but it's going to have a vocal soloist with continuo, and the trombone functions as an obligato soloist, a second soloist to the vocal solo. There's Ziani, Joseph Fuchs, Albrechtsberger, even Leopold Mozart, who wrote the concerto, have composed music that does this. And it's being published now more and more. Ken Schifrin and Virgo Music published it starting back in the 1980s and 90s. But others have come along and published it as well. You can find it recorded on YouTube and on the internet. It's bona fide trombone music. It's not an arrangement. It's not a transcription. It's originally conceived for solo trombone with solo voice and continuo. There's a whole body of that. Then all the music that comes from the Renaissance period, if it's vocal music, it's fair game for trombones to play. And quite a bit of Baroque music is the same way. If it's vocal music, concerted, 2, 3, 4 or more parts, there's lots of 6, 8, 12 part music, vocal music that would have been played by trombones, that was played by trombones. So there's more repertoire than you can hardly imagine. Yeah. I mean, I think I told you I found about 80 composers who just composed on a single text, O Sacrum Convivium.
Yeah.
I mean, that's typical. There are 2 resources that you've got to know about if you want to find this music and start to have fun with it. One is IMSLP, right? That's the online public domain music library. People contribute to it as a matter of goodwill, right? Then there's another website that's much like it, or another online library that's much like it, called Choral Wiki, Choral Wikipedia. And you can find all this vocal music, lots of Renaissance vocal music, that has been put into modern notation so that you can read it. Renaissance music in its original form, no.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to read that if you're a modern musician trained to read modern notation. You need somebody to have translated it into modern notation. That's what Choral Wiki is so good for. There's many, many pieces there, hundreds and hundreds of pieces that folks have done that, and they just contribute them to the library as a way of sharing this music with one another.
Yeah, that's great, because I mean, we're kind of told that, these composers didn't write for us, and it's like, well, maybe they didn't, but their peers did, and we have access to that now more than ever. I always joke around with my students that they have more access to technology than the astronauts did on the moon with the phones in our pockets, and every day we just have access to more and more of these resources, and why not use them? I had we're a little bit over, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask about this. Is when we were playing together, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, there was some improvisation, and I think you'd played Sackbut that morning for demonstration, or maybe the day before, and you mentioned suddenly you're playing really, really great, these really interesting bebop lines, and you're like, oh, it's always tricky playing with the tritone versus in Baroque music. And does improvising in these two styles aid each other, or is it just kind of the same kind of way that playing traditional jazz versus bebop is different?
Well, modern music, whether it's jazz or classically oriented music, if you're improvising in a modern style, you're most likely going to use chromaticism. You're going to have chromatic lines, chromatic passing tones, just chromaticism everywhere. This does not fit in early music because it didn't exist. So you've got to realize that if we go backwards through time, we go from really complex harmonies in modern jazz music back to even just the early 1900s at the dawn of the jazz era. The music is less scalar. It certainly doesn't have a lot of chromaticism in it, but it's less scalar. It leaps around in arpeggios more. Dixieland music sort of leaps around in arpeggios more than later jazz does. But it all is pretty harmonically based around modern major minor tonalities. Go back another 100 years and you're going to hear major minor tonalities right back to 1700, when Bach is really, J.S. Bach is the one who sort of codifies the major minor system. But before him, the music is modal. The major minor system doesn't exist. People don't learn scales. There's no such thing as a major scale or a minor scale. They don't think about that at all. They think in terms of modes. The composers write music in modes. And they're not thinking A, B, C, D, C sharp, E, D sharp, E flat. They're thinking ut, re, mi, fa, so. And la is the top note, and la only comes occasionally. So we're really just dealing with a very much more limited range and a limited vocabulary. So what's the upshot? If you're improvising in early music styles, you remain diatonic. You stick with the notes of the mode that you're in, if you're in Renaissance music, or you stick to the notes of the key area you're in if you're playing Baroque music. After that, the music can become more chromatic. But if you hear somebody using chromatic passing tones and whatnot in early music as they improvise, it just sounds wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong. It doesn't fit. In the same way that if you hear somebody improvising on a jazz standard and they just use the diatonic scale of the key, it just sounds as vanilla as it can be. Yeah. Or somebody who uses the blues scale exclusively. That's all they use. Just the blues scale for everything. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we I don't know if you've seen our other interviews, but we have a tradition of ending with mouth trumpet noises. And usually, in my experience, the trumpet players' sounds they make with their mouths are usually just excuses. But in this case, we're going to be doing some buzzing, and I'll demonstrate some. So some of your best mouth trumpet noises.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is something that I've worked on in the past quite a bit, because it doesn't help everyone, but it really helped me, because when I became a professional trombonist, I was working so much. I was so tired all the time. I started to develop bad habits. Just a lazy embouchure. My corners were not engaged because they were just tired all the time. And the thing that helped me fix that was what you just did. Is free. I call it free buzzing. Arnold Jacobs says don't do it, but it helped me quite a lot. So what I did was I took the tune Yankee Doodle. I like that tune because it's in two parts and it's relatively short, and I would free buzz Yankee Doodle, go up a half step and do it again. Go up a half step and do it again until my face was just burning. That's a good workout. That's a really good workout. I could not cheat with my embouchure, like mouthpiece pressure. It's not like playing the horn at that point. So and so on and so forth.
I think I received word from Dakota that yours was fine, but mine was terrible. So I don't know if I'm being requested. I have to see. Dakota said I need some work, so
focus.
Maybe I'll practice some Yankee Doodle, and then I'll.
The Yankee Doodle has anything to do with it, but you want the corners of your mouth to focus forward, like you're saying the word. If you can see my face, saying the word who. Who. It's very gentle, and it focuses to a soft center. and I'm looking at myself in the screen. It's too dark. You can't really see the aperture, but I want that aperture to be oval shaped and compact and clear. Okay, enough. We're going over time.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for the I think this is the most pedagogical approach to the mouth trumpet noise we've seen so far. And so I think we all thank you for that. And thanks for spending time with us. I'm sorry we weren't able to meet up in person. And hopefully we get to do one of these again, because there's a lot we talked about that I think a lot of projects you've had that are really the music with video project there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you have going on that I'm sure we'd love to hear about. And I'll work on my trumpet sounds, and we'll meet again sometime. So thanks again for meeting with us. It's great as always to chat with you, and hopefully next year we'll get to do this in person.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the Tidewater Brass Institute, hopefully probably June maybe of this next summer, about a year from now.
Maybe it'll be less hot.
Yeah, I hope that we can do it. Hope that all this relaxes and goes away and we can get back together.
Yeah,
thanks a lot, Kenneth.
Well, thank
Appreciate
you.
We are so grateful to have brought Dr. Michael Hall onto the show today to educate us on the predecessor of our modern brass instruments today. If you would like your product or school to be featured on our broadcast, please reach out to Dakota Corbliss, Director of Operations at dakota@fredbrass.com, and we'll be sure to set it up. Thank you all for listening today, and we'll see you next time.